All right, we're continuing in our study out of the book of James, as you've already heard. But before we jump into that, let me kind of give you a roadmap of where we're headed next. So this next 2 weeks, we're going to finish the book of James. So these are going to be our last two installments, kind of landing the plane, if you will, on the book of James. Next week, we're going to be in the second half of James chapter 5. Next week is going to be an important Sunday. If you need any sort of prayer, if you need any sort of healing, if you need anything that is specific or that you've been burdened with for some time, make your way. You do not want to miss next Sunday. We will have a special healing prayer time after both services. You don't want to miss that. We're super excited about that. On December 4th, that'll be when we're going to have our baptisms as well. We're kicking off a new sermon series entitled "What Child Is This?" And we're going to be looking at a prophecy out of the Old Testament from the book of Isaiah that describes some of the characteristics, some of the names of Jesus. I'm super excited for this study coming up. That study will take us through the end of the year, through Christmas. We're praying that God's going to do some amazing things through this. So we encourage you to invite people to our services. We encourage you to invite your friends. Come, don't miss. You're going to be blessed for it. Today we have a great section of scripture to unpack. As you know by now, James, the author of this book, is the half-brother of Jesus. But what we often tend to forget is that James is also the pastor of the church there in Jerusalem. And it's important to highlight this for us and to reflect on this because it really shapes the heart of the words and the things that he's telling us through this passage. He's writing to a church that he loves. He's writing to a people group that he loves, people who are in the middle of persecution, people who can't meet. They're kind of scattered abroad. And so he wants them to stay strong and mature through all that they are going through. He wants to make sure that their faith is genuine and real. And although they can't meet collectively, individually, he's challenging them and reminding them, hey, your faith, this faith that you claim to have, it's got to be lived out. You have to be the light in the community, in the circumstance, wherever you find yourself. If you have faith, if you claim to have faith, then it's going to be lived out. It's going to be evidenced by the way that you do life. So today we're going to unpack James 4, the end there, verses 13 all the way midway through about chapter 5. There's some really, really good stuff that we're going to uncover today. As you can imagine, it's a long section, so we may not hit everything in great detail, but I encourage you to read and do some digging deeper on your own fantastic passage. Now, before we read the passage this morning, I need you to first catch something. And this is where I want to start today, and I believe that this is why we were kind of having some of those technical difficulties, and the devil was trying to meddle with some of this stuff, because this is a really important message that we're going to unpack. There's a spirit behind these verses that you just kind of have to catch. Otherwise, if you're not careful, we can read this section and sort of miss the big picture of what's going on, right? We can think maybe James has an agenda, a bias towards a certain people, towards a certain group of people, or we may think, man, James is saying something here when he's not really saying that at all. So here's the big idea for today, and maybe the whole book, and it's found in James chapter 5, verse 8, and we'll come back and go through verse by verse in light of what God tells us through James here. Here it is, James 5, verse 8. It says this: "You too, be patient and stand firm, because," say the next line with me, "the Lord's coming is near." The Lord's coming back, y'all. So here's the heart of James behind these words. He's saying there's a spirit that you need to catch. There's this urgency behind these words. This is the motivation that he's writing to us with. Behind every single word, you'll see this urgency and this the urgency of eternity. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this series, if you remember, that I felt God impressing on me and my heart for us as a church this very same urgency. And what I heard God saying was, hey, prepare the bride. Prepare the church. Get the church ready for Christ's return. Get the church ready for eternity. So James's pastoral heart and his urgency really resonate with mine. And I pray that we would get this in our spirits this morning because James writes with this perspective in mind. It's kind of the passion behind all the words that he will give. I've entitled my message this morning, "The Eternal Perspective." The eternal perspective, for those of you that are taking notes. And I feel that this is so critical for us today, and so critical for us to be reminded of that this is not our home, everybody. We forget that sometimes. We're just kind of passing through. The Bible describes us as sojourners, as we're just kind of ambassadors. This is not really our home, and we need to be reminded of this because it's really easy for us oftentimes to get focused on the things of the earth. We get focused on the economy. We get focused on the political and geopolitical issues of the day. We get focused on our decreasing 401ks. Lord help us, everybody. Right? We can get focused on our social media status and the influence that we have. And we put all this focus on our earthly kingdoms, and we can live this Christian life missing that greater, bigger kingdom perspective, that bigger reality. And if we're not careful, the words of James and the words of the entire Bible just become this like anecdotal kind of self-help, right? Or they can become just rules. Don't do this. Don't do that. Definitely don't do that, right? Or do this instead. Right? And James would say, hey, don't miss the big picture here. We are growing and maturing so we can be complete for eternity. There's an eternal perspective that we need to have as we live. So let me say it this way. Living with eternity in mind is the wisest way to live. An eternal perspective keeps us from chasing, these empty dreams and material gratification. And this perspective now becomes the driving urgency and passion that fuels out the way that we live the words of James and, in fact, the entire Bible. Let me show you this from 2 Corinthians 4:18. It says, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, on the jobs, on economy, on the interest rates rising, inflation, but we focus our eyes on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen, so there's a spiritual reality, the unseen, that is eternal. Now, if we live this way, if we let this sink in, it will forever change the way that we think about life and the way we live it. I love this quote from Charles Spurgeon. Let me show you this. Unless we purposely live with a view of the next world, we cannot make much of our present existence. So true. Now, this is also from C.S. Lewis. I love this quote. I've said it before here. It says this, aim at heaven, and you're going to get earth thrown in. You aim at earth, you're not going to get either. That's a good quote. So an eternal perspective, or an eternal attitude, if you will, of the gospel leads us to the understanding of where we occupy our place in God's plan. And here's the cool thing. I want to encourage you with this morning. Attitudes are contagious, everybody. You ever been around somebody with a good attitude? Right? You just can't but start laughing. And if somebody just laughs the whole time, you just start giggling with them, right? But you ever been around somebody that has a bad attitude? Yeah, that's contagious too, right? It rubs off. And typically we think of something as being contagious, as being a bad thing, but in this case, it's a good thing. So I pray we would leave here today infected with the perspective and this attitude. All right, so if you're taking notes, 4 ingredients this morning we're going to unpack to have an eternal perspective. 4 ingredients, jot these down. Here's the first one, and then we'll start walking our way through the text. Here it is. Our time is short. Our life here on earth is short. And this is where James kind of starts off. So look at James 4:13 and 14. He says, now listen. Now listen here. Right? This is kind of like what a parent does to warn their kids, right? This is kind of the spirit behind these words. And what James is saying here comes across as correction, but please hear this as protection, not correction. So think of a parent who sees their kid running into the street and yells at them, hey, look both ways before you're going to cross the street. This is the spirit, right? Here's what he says. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or to that city. Spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. So you make plans for next year, but you don't even know if you're going to be alive tomorrow. That's kind of what James is saying here. So this attitude was their attitude, and this could quickly become our attitudes as well, because we become so earthly minded, and we think that we're just self-sufficient. See, many of the Jews in the ancient world were traders, and they were businessmen, and they were very, very successful. And their life, similar to ours, was kind of like clockwork. It was just flowing. Everything was dialed in. We are in control. We're making all these plans. We're going to do all these things. We're going to trade and sell and buy, and we're going to invest in crypto, and we're going to get rich, right? How's that working out for you? Don't remind me. Right? And James is basically saying, hey, you don't have control. You're not in control of what happens tomorrow. What he's saying is it's foolishness and arrogance to make plans apart from God without considering the fact that every breath that we take is in his hands. He holds it all. Now, please hear me. James is not saying do not plan. I know some of you are like, cool, I just roll with the wave, everybody. No, it's not what James is saying, right? Planning is important. Jesus, in fact, talked about a parable of a man building a home and his need to plan out the cost of the home to see if he could actually complete it. Jesus actually talked about a wise general going into battle having a plan. God had a specific plan when he built the tabernacle and the temple in the Old Testament. God had a specific plan when he designed the universe and everything and all the cosmos and the stars. God had a specific and unique plan when he designed us and our bodies and all the strategies that were used to put the human body together. God is into planning, so that's wisdom, right? So don't think that James is trying to knock planning, right? But the issue that James is dealing with here is an attitude of the heart that approaches life with this presumption that we can control our lives, that we got this. And in our self-reliance, we no longer need God. He is no longer our all-encompassing sufficiency. James then asks an extremely introspective question so that we might pause and look at our lives from God's perspective. He says this, what is your life? Like we can answer that in a myriad of ways, right? But James says, you're a mist. Like in the original Greek language, it says, you're a vapor, you're a puff of smoke. That's our life, right? So I think about a tea kettle, that you got on the stove, and it begins to boil, and it whistles, and steam rises out of the spout, and then you run over there and you turn off the dial, and what happens? All the smoke goes away. The steam just disappears. Job in his book declared it this way, my life is but a breath. So let's do this together. Take a deep breath with me. You ready? There goes your life. Right? So James says, in light of eternity, our time is short. Now, I wanted to illustrate this for you. I remember seeing a seminary professor of mine do this many, many years ago, and it was fascinating. It was something that just stuck with me. And so I'm going to illustrate for you using this piece of rope here. Now, this is a 100-foot rope, and I'm going to take this all the way to the back here. And just imagine with me for a minute what this looks like. So here, I'm going to give this to you, Cheryl. Hold on to that, please. And just keep unwinding it as we go. Thank you so much. All right. So this rope, let's say, and it's not even 100 feet, probably like 30, 40 feet or whatever. Let's say this represents eternity, right? Do you see this little red guy right here? That's our life. That's your life. That's about it. In line of all this. So just take a look how, this is not even the 100 years. This is our life, everybody. This is our life. You can roll that back up. Thank you. James is saying if we're not careful, we forget that perspective. We can forget that. We forget that there's often little that we can't control. Like we show up in the morning thinking everything's going to work, and then everything breaks down, right? We're not going to live forever on this planet, everybody. Now, we all know that. We all know that at some point we're born, and at some point we're going to die, but we all get so caught up in life and the long days and the long weeks and the long years, right? I mean, who's with me that 2020 felt like it was 20 years, right? and when we begin to forget that our time is short, and we forget this eternal perspective, and we get this attitude that I'm self-sufficient. I'm going to live forever. I got big plans. I'm going to accomplish big dreams, Pastor. And James says, hey, you have to understand that it's complete arrogance to make plans apart from the sovereignty of God. You're but a mist. And Paul goes on and tells the Corinthian church that this is earthly mindedness. You're just thinking about the world and the things of the world. And we can all do this from time to time. We can lose sight of the bigger picture and perspective. This is why I love what I believe the word of the Lord for our church is for 2023, the vision that God gave me for us, and that is trust me. Trust me. We're going to trust the Lord in 2023. We don't know what the future holds, but we're going to trust God, right? Trust the Lord with all your heart, the Bible says. Lean not on your own understanding, right? So we don't know exactly what it's going to happen. In all your ways, acknowledge him. So Lord, it's all about you. What do you think about this? Where would you have me be? And then it says, and he will direct our paths and make them straight. So our time is short, and we need to put our reliance in the hands of this powerful, almighty, all-knowing God. There's a great modern theologian that captures it really, really well. Tim McGraw. Here's what he says. Someday, I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying, like tomorrow was a gift, and you've got eternity to think about it. What did I do with it? I went skydiving. I went Rocky Mountain climbing, right? Anybody else with me? All right. Let me fix that Tim McGraw thing, all right? Here's Martin Luther. This is a proper theologian, okay? He put it this way. Live as though Christ died yesterday, rose today, and he's returning tomorrow. That's good advice, everybody. It's good advice. All right, here's the second eternal perspective that we are to have. When we are here, God's plan is our purpose. So if life is short, God has a plan for us, and that's going to be our purpose. So if life is short, we got to make it count. And the way we do that is we get on God's plan. We have a purpose here on earth, and our purpose is his plan, not our plan. And again, James is writing things to his readers and saying these words because he loves them. So instead of all that planning and control and all the things we desire, what we ought to be doing, James says in the next verse, is if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or do that. And I just love this statement. Listen, everybody, God has a good plan for your life, and God will accomplish his plans for your life. Now, I want you to internalize that reality today, okay? God has a plan, and it's a good plan. How do I know if he's good, Pastor? We look to the cross. We look to the cross. He has come to rescue us and to ransom us. He has not come to condemn us. And the cross is the objective evidence which lays before us on repeat, regardless of what happens in life, what difficulties or what pain or what challenges or struggles come our way. We look to this all-powerful, all-knowing, everywhere at once God, and we can trust him because we see the good work that he's done on our behalf by sending Jesus to die on the cross. I know we worry sometimes what the future is going to hold and what all happens. Let me just say this to you. This is going to help some of you. Everything that is happening is not outside of God's control. He's in control. God's got a plan for it. And nothing will stop the plans of God. Not only does God have a plan for creation and for the universe and for the world, but listen, God also has a plan for your life. And God also has a plan for my life. I love this out of Ephesians 2. It says, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do what? Good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So it's a powerful thought here that God has some good things in store for us. And if we have the urgency that time is short and God has a plan and a purpose for us, why would we waste our time doing anything else but what the Lord wanted? What his will would be. So the plan that God has for me becomes the aim of my life. I want you to write it down this way. The safest and best place that we can ever be as individuals or as people is in the center of God's will. Do you want to know why? The will of God comes from the heart of God, from his heart for you. And God is a good Father. God loves you. He has good plans and purposes for his children. So I don't need to be afraid of God's will because it's rooted in his love for me. So then James goes on in verse 16, and he says, as it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting, he says, is evil. So he's saying the way that you're currently living, it's really full of arrogance. You're boasting, you're bragging about tomorrow and all this cool stuff that you're going to do, and you're not really submitting to the will of God or to the sovereignty of God. It's like one theologian said, there's atheism and then there's self-theism, thinking like, I'm God. I'm in control of all of this, right? So two issues here. One is the sovereignty of God, and secondly, submission to God. So first, it's the sovereignty and recognizing God's will and saying, Lord, if you will it, this is going to be up to you. Whether I live or not, I'm alive tomorrow. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trust you. But the second issue is submitting to God and saying, it's your will. Like, what do you want me to do tomorrow? Do you even want me to go to that town? Is it even your desire to invest in crypto? That's a question I probably should have asked God. But anyways, well, what is your will? Yeah, I feel you, right? In fact, Jesus teaches us to pray, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I love the fact that as a church, we exist to help people find and to help people what? Follow Jesus. And we follow Jesus into the plans that he has for us. In fact, one of the sessions in our Journey U class is we give you a spiritual gifts inventory, which is to help you identify what your gifts are and what the God-given talents are, and so that you can kind of start to get a grasp and a sense of the purpose that God has for your life. So please hear this morning. Regardless of who you are, regardless of where you've been, regardless of what you've been through and in your history, God has a purpose for your life. And it's never too late to get on mission with God. I remember my very first pastor that kind of took me under his wing and started mentoring me in this. And he started speaking this into me. Hey, God has a purpose for your life. God has a plan for your life. And he saw some things in me that I didn't even see at the time. And so he's like, hey, I think God's calling you to be a preacher. I said, whoa, okay. So then he's like, why don't you come up and on a Sunday night, we used to have a Sunday night service where it was for the youth, and they would encourage youth to participate and preach and all this stuff. So he calls me up to preach. I was 13 years old when he calls me up to preach, right? And so I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, this is before I even know, hey, can I get a good amen, right? Like, I didn't even know how to do that. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to preach about heaven. That sounds like a good thing. We all want to go to heaven, right? So I was like kind of fishing for amens, right? So I get up and I wanted to ask this question. How many of you want to go to heaven? I'm 13 years old, so I'm thinking, yeah, everybody's like, woo, yeah, pastor, preach. Yeah, of course we all want to go to heaven, right? So I said that phrase. Now, in my mind, I said, how many of you want to go to heaven? But what came out of my mouth because of the nerves that I had was, how many of you want to go to hell? Oh, no. Well, as you can imagine, crickets. Right? Nobody said anything. So the very next thing out of my mouth, guess what it was? O ye of little faith. Yeah. But that pastor saw something in me that at the time I didn't even see. Oh, I think I want to encourage you. God has a plan for your life. It's time that you see what that plan is and step into obedience. Don't waste another day living apart from God. Then he gives us this warning here, James does in verse 17. He says this, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, now this is strong, he says, it is sin to them. Now, we think of sin as, okay, the things that are prohibited. So all the things that doesn't please God, or all the things that God says are wrong. But James here makes it very clear. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him, that is sin. And this is typically referred to, people call this the sin of omission. So there's the sin of commission, the things that we do, but then there's sins that we omit. So if a person, let's bring it back to our context, really does surrender to God and says, okay, God, right now I'm breathing. I know why I'm on this earth. You have a reason. What is your will? What do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? And as it becomes clear to you the call of God that he has on your life, or what you should be doing and not be doing, and if you don't do that thing, he says that is sin. Now remember what sin is. Sin is actually missing the mark. So what James is saying here is that when you're not walking in the plans and purposes that God has for you, you're missing the mark of God's best for your life. You're missing the best that God has for you. In fact, the plans that will actually bring you the most joy and the most fulfillment in life, you're missing out on those. And I want to encourage you, some of you here this morning, and dispel some myths, because I hear people all the time say, well, Pastor, I'm just too young. I'm too young. I can't do it. Listen, you're never too young. The Bible says, let no one look down on you because of your youth. Then we get the opposite extreme, and people say, well, Pastor, I'm too old. My time is done. Listen, we need you older people. We need that wisdom and that perspective and that life experience that you bring. We need people like you that have been walking with Jesus for years to speak into our lives. But Pastor, I'm a baby Christian. I'm new to this. I don't even know what exactly everything. Listen, you were saved for such a time as this. Not for then and there, but for the here and now. But Pastor, I've messed up so bad. You don't even know my story. Listen, the book of Romans calls the gifts that God gives you irrevocable. He doesn't take them back. There's always grace for you. You can always come back and always re-engage into the plan and purpose that he has for your life. If you're breathing today, God's got a plan for you that does not change. Come on, let me hear a good amen right there, right? So we got to drop all the excuses, get on God's time and get on God's plan. Ask him to reveal it to you, and then we're going to walk in it. All right, here's the third ingredient, if you're taking notes. Third ingredient for an eternal perspective. This is a big one. Our possessions are not our own. Our possessions, the thing that we own, are not our own. Now, everything that we have belongs to God. That's the eternal perspective that we need to have. So we hold on to everything with an open fist, right? Not a closed fist. Now, we're going to read some verses here that are really intense, maybe the most intense in the whole book of James. And James does not hold back, and he gives a strong rebuke towards a group of people, the rich. Okay, so here's my request. Don't shoot the messenger, everybody, okay? But the message in this section is about to get in our faces. Here's what he says. James 5, 1 through 6. He says this. Now listen. So again, same kind of language like before. This is what same kind of thought, the urgency. Hey, he's trying to bring some protection, not correction. Listen, you rich people. And some of you are like, sweet, Pastor, that's not me. I'm going to check out and sleep the rest of the message because I'm broke as a joke, right? Now, before you're too quick to jump and say this doesn't apply to you, let me give you some perspective here. I did a little research on this. When you and I measure each other against the world, right? By the way, we're at 8 billion people now in the world. We just turned that number. Did you know that 3/4 of the world's population lives on $300 a year or less? Right? So if you make $48,000 a year, you are in the top 1% of the world. If you make $40,000 a year, combined household income, you are in the top 2% of earners in the world. Get this, 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. 3 billion people live on less than $2 a day. I mean, I go through about half a month in just one day on coffee alone. Now, I'm not saying that to condemn you or to judge you or to make us feel guilty in any way. I say it to give us some perspective and some context, right? That you and I are blessed, everybody. We're blessed people in relation to the whole world. So we can learn from this. We can learn from this. And this passage is so thought-provoking. This will serve us well as we unpack the principles of handling money in the end times. How to handle money with an earthly perspective. 3 things that we're going to notice here that he describes. He says this, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Aren't you glad that you came to church? Weeping and wail. I mean, those are pretty crazy terms, right? There's misery coming, and he's talking about the return of Christ. He's talking about there's a coming judgment. And he says, your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. So 3 things characterized wealth in the first century: an abundance of food, an abundance of clothing, and not just any clothing. It was only the rich who could actually go out and buy clothing, because the poor would have to sew and make their own clothes. So you got abundance of clothing, you got abundance of food, and then you have abundance of gold and silver that you're just collecting. Now this isn't really a profound thought, but just think about this. Moths don't typically eat or don't typically eat clothes that you're wearing, right? Food doesn't really rot if you're cooking with it and if you're eating with it and if you're going through it, right? And so James here is very serious about this idea of stockpiling stuff, of just collecting stuff. And he says, their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. So strong words. Now watch this. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. So how do you handle money in the last days? How do you remember possessions are not our own, but everything we have belongs to God? Write it down this way. 3 subpoints here. Don't hoard wealth greedily, but steward it wisely. Steward it wisely. The picture here he's painting is of a person who's just collecting a bunch of stuff, right? Never intending to use it, but just wanting to have it. And now all of a sudden, it's good to nobody, right? You guys remember toilet paper? Yeah. Wasn't too long ago, people were hoarding it, right? How about Purell? You guys remember that? I mean, I still don't understand the toilet paper thing. The Purell, fine, but okay. And you know what's interesting? God really convicted me on this week too. He really did, because guess what, everybody? I'm hoarding a shoe collection. And I don't say that to like brag. I say that because I'm ashamed reading this, right? And this is really important. I want you to hear this for us who live in America. We live in a society where accumulation of stuff is good, right? Amassing money and possessions is commendable. It's often one of the ways our culture celebrates and measures someone's success in life. The more you have, the better off you are in life, right? Anybody ever see the show Hoarders? Like, you ever watch that show? It's eye-opening, scary stuff. Like, sometimes I just can't watch it. I just can't get through it. Like, I need to be bathed in Purell. Like, seriously, it's just like, whoa. And you know what's interesting is it's a legit medical disorder now. It's called hoarding disorder. And I was studying it because I wanted to know why. What would drive people to hoard stuff? Like, why do people do that? Well, one of the things that I thought was so interesting that I found were, here are some of the effects of hoarding. And I think this is the same effect that when it comes to wealth, whether we have a little bit or a lot. You know what the effects were? Depression. The effects were anxiety. The effects were separation. And if you watch the show, you're actually instantly stricken by all the challenges and the pain that these families go through, the pain that it brings family members to see people being so stingy or because of the way that they live, all the dynamics that are at play. And one of the words that's so interesting that describes the effects of hoarding, you know what it was? Isolation, right? Isn't that so true? Like, you and I both know that stingy people are what? Lonely people, right? When we get stingy, what do? We isolate ourselves from each other because we're just hoarding all our stuff, and it's all our stuff. No, make sure nobody gets into my stuff. This is my stuff, right? Jesus said it this way, Matthew 6, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal them, but store up for yourself treasures where? In heaven. Get that eternal perspective, everybody. There's no moth, there's no vermin, hopefully there's no flies. Still don't know the reason for flies, but they're not gonna be in heaven in Jesus' name, right? And thieves are not gonna break in and steal it, all right? Now, James is confronting the people who were hoarding wealth and were using their resources for themselves. And he's saying, hey, at the return of Christ, this is going to be evidence against you, right? In other words, your assets, all these things that you think are great, are going to become suddenly liabilities. And it's the picture of a courtroom here. He's saying that's going to be evidence against you. And here's the proof, like James taught us before. You're not taking care of the widows. You're not taking care of the orphans. You're only thinking about yourself. And true religion takes care of those that are less fortunate than you, and you're not. All you're doing is thinking about yourself. Now, interesting historical side note here, as they were hoarding this wealth, not more than 10 years after the book of James was written, Rome comes in, takes over Jerusalem, and ravages everything that they have. 10 years. Now, I want to make this very clear here before we continue. James is not condemning wealth. A lot of people read this and, well, I guess I better sell everything I have and go run for the hills. That's not what he's saying, okay? He is warning us and saying, hey, there's great responsibility that comes with wealth. We are to be good stewards of the gifts God has entrusted us with. Nothing wrong with accumulation or saving for retirement or being smart and planning and being a wise investor, but we need to be careful not to adapt or to adopt to the worldly standards of worth and value and identity based on the accumulation of stuff, which brings meaning and value to our selfish desires. He goes on, he says this in verse 4, look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields and are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters, really interesting stuff, have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. So James gives us another principle here to remind us about possessions. Here it is. Don't handle wealth deceitfully, but distribute it honestly. So don't handle your wealth with deceit, but think of others and be honest. So James here is talking about neglect and injustice, right? The rich would rob these people with fraudulent means. Now you and I may not be negligent landowners as they were evidently, but this still hits home, right? Because what James is talking about is the employer-employee relationship. He's talking about the business owners. He's talking about the managers, the supervisors, those that are in charge of making sure that wealth is honestly and equally distributed, and it wasn't. So let's get real practical with some examples. I'm just going to give you a few of these. You could probably come up with your own. There's tons. How about when you overcharge for certain things, right? Like during the pandemic, when people were just hoarding all this stuff, and a little thing of Purell, I actually paid like 3x what it actually cost, just because I was like, I need this, so I'm going to pay $25 for a little bottle, right? Or what about this one? When you sell a car that has problems, but you don't tell the person you're selling it to that it has problems, no, nothing wrong here, nothing to see, this is a perfect car. Look, bing, bumper falls off, right? Or always looking to pull a fast one on somebody. But Pastor, this is just good business. I'm just a good businessman, right? We need to be careful, James is saying. By the way, this just really gets to me and it gets in me. And I don't want to get on my soapbox here, but I just start thinking about the companies and corporations and corrupt government entities and how they take advantage of people. Like, you ever remember Watergate? Anybody ever remember Enron? Like you can see all these big dictators who are living fat city and their people are dying and starving in the streets. It's kind of what he's talking about here, right? Here's how he goes on. He says, you have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence, and you have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. So not only were these people not paying the wages of the poor laborers, but the rich were leading a lifestyle of exuberance and indulgence, even at the expense of other people's lives. So here's our final attitude towards money. Don't spend it selfishly. I love this next word, but share it generously, everybody. Generously, share it. We can live a life that's all about spend, or we can live a life that's all about share, and share. We can spend it or we can share it. And God blesses those that share their wealth. I love these scriptures here because they just really challenged me and inspire me to live in such a way, live a life that God actually rewards. And being generous is what God rewards. I love this out of Luke 12:15. Here's what it says. These are the words of Jesus. Then he said to them, watch out. Be on guard against any and all kinds of greed. So there's different kinds of greed out there. You got to watch out for them. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. I'm just going to get all this stuff, right? And this has kind of been one of my biggest prayers. I hope that as a community of faith, as a church, we would be known as some of the most generous people around. Like when people think of Journey Church, they would think, man, those people are so generous with their time. Those people are so generous with their money. Those people are so generous with their building and their space, and they're always doing stuff in the community, and good on them. I actually just got a call yesterday from a family member who actually looked up our church. We put these little cards in the food basket. She looked up our church. She found my phone number, and she called me, and she said, hey, I don't know who you are, and you don't know me, but I just want to thank you so much for blessing us with this food basket. What you don't know, she said, is there's 2 kids that were identified by the school district. And I'm their legal guardian. In fact, I'm in the process of adopting these kids. Their dad died of a suicide, and their mom's a druggie and cannot take care of them. And I'm in the process of adopting them. And to get this basket means the world to us, that I can be providing a Thanksgiving dinner to these kids. Wow. And I thought, man, yes, good on God, good on Journey. Thank you guys for being so faithful. That's what we want to be about, people. That's what our goal is, to be generous with our stuff. It's not ours anyways. We don't own it. Now, sadly, I know, and probably you know, a lot of waiters and waitresses who hate working on Sunday. And it's not because they're coming to church or they're missing church. You know why they hate working on Sundays? Because a lot of Christians flood their restaurant. And a lot of Christians do not tip. And they're really stingy. I'll just leave that there. If God has been so generous with me and so generous with you, how can we not live but a generous life towards others? I love this, how one pastor said it. He said this: we will either love people and use things, or we will love things and use people. It's a choice. It's a choice. And James says, hey, not only are you hoarding it, not only are you keeping it for yourself, but you're fattened yourself for the day of slaughter. Now, this would have been a picture that they would have gotten immediately, right? A cow fattened for slaughter eats to its heart's content, right? Oblivious that they're going to be slaughtered in the end. And it's the same with those who live selfishly. Greedy people fatten themselves with wealth, not knowing that they're just like those animals that are getting ready for the kill. And here's the principle: those who live in self-indulgence lose that eternal perspective, everybody. So write it down this way: our earthly wealth is far more temporary than we know, and our eternal wealth is far more valuable than we can ever imagine. We can ever imagine. James is saying, hey, money and materialism and possessions, they're fleeting. Right? This is no time for us to be hoarding money. This is no time for us to be diminishing our testimony because we're stingy. We want to be wise and generous so we can make the greatest impact in the world. Okay, here's the last ingredient to an eternal mindset. Write this down. Here's the 4th one. Our trials, the things that we're experiencing, the troubles that we have, they're temporary, everybody. Let me get a good amen right there. They're temporary. So I want you to really remember this, that when you're having Thanksgiving dinner and, you know, those annoying family members that you only see once a year are there, right? The trials are temporary, okay? Just take a deep breath, drink some water, you'll get through it. I'm preaching to myself right now, okay? I'm going to see family in California. Lord, pray for me if you remember. All right, so what James does here, he turns his attention towards those that have been neglected, right? Those that haven't been paid their wages. In fact, he's saying there's people that have been murdered because of the wealthy individuals who have taken over and who are domineering these subcultures. Now that may not be us, right? But let me speak to all of us who are hurting, who are hurting right now. And in the last season, the last 2 years or stuff, we've all experienced some sort of hurt, right? I mean, at minimum, we've seen some anxiety, some frustration, uneasiness, restlessness, worry, right? And James tells us here, be patient. Endure. Stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. This too shall pass. Listen, God is using everything in your life, the good, the bad, the ugly, to prepare you for eternity. Remember, he wants us to be complete and he wants us to be mature. So he uses these problems in our lives to help us mature spiritually so we can become more like Christ. That means none of the problems that we experience are arbitrary or outside the power and the grace of God. God uses our struggles to strengthen our faith. It's similar to like those of us that lift weights, right? When you work out a muscle, the more you work it out, you start stockpiling more weight and you start working out that muscle. You add weight so you can become stronger. That's what God is doing. God uses problems to help you grow spiritually, building your character through a series of tests that strengthen your patience and endurance and persistence and all kinds of other traits he wants to build in you. Ultimately, he wants us to be a living image of Jesus. So here's how James finishes out. This is 7 through 12 in chapter 5. He says, be patient. Now, this is so difficult for me because I'm a very impatient person at times, right? Like, I'm that kind of guy that's yelling at the microwave. Like, come on. Why is this thing going so slow? Like, what is going on, right? The other word that you can put in here is the word endurance, right? So he's saying, hey, don't stop. Endure. Don't stop. You can sense this urgency and this pleading. And this is what I've been praying for us as a church this week. As some of us have been going through a lot. You know, we've been going through financial hardship, relational hardship. And for some of us, the holidays are coming up. And this is going to amplify and magnify some of that hardship and relational stress and strain. Here's the word of the Lord for you today. Whatever you're going through, this too shall pass, everybody. This too shall pass. God is maturing you and growing you. Don't quit on God. Don't quit on your faith. Don't quit on your family. Don't quit on your spouse. Don't quit on your kids. God is using the process for your good. Remember way back in chapter 1, he said, consider it pure joy when you go through various trials, because you know that those trials produce perseverance in you. Therefore, let perseverance complete its work so that you can be complete and mature, not lacking anything. Look what he says. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. And then he gives us this interesting warning. Verse 9, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. So he's coming, he's near, he's close, he's right at the door, right? And here's what's interesting. When we're in a trial, when we're hurting, when we're in pain, who are the people that we hurt the most? Those that we care about the most, right? And that's what James is saying here. We start to grumble, not with the trial, not with the things that are happening to us or the oppressors. We start to grumble amongst ourselves. And we gotta be very careful, because pain is fertile ground for the enemy to come and cause division and disunity in our lives. Because we're going through all this stuff, we're not at our best, our perspective may be skewed, and we don't quite understand. And the temptation is to grumble and judge and become disunified. And we have to fight more than ever against this. We can't let the enemy divide us, everybody. That's exactly what's been going on in this season. The enemy is winning. He has come in, and there's a lot of pain and a lot of confusion and a lot of things that COVID has brought about, and all the things that have been going and what's been happening. We're starting to infight, right? And now we're starting to infight based on just the things that would never even cross our mind to fight about. Like, I'm on this team and you're on that team politically. We can't be friends. And now we're disjoined and not in unity. Or man, I like the color blue and you like the color red. Sorry, we can't be friends. Like that was in the 90s, folks. We got rid of the Crips and the Bloods way back then. It's over, right? We got to be careful, right? Because the enemy has brought tremendous division lately. That's what this is saying. Now, unity, listen, doesn't mean uniformity. We do have differences, but it does mean that you can come together and have a greater kingdom good than we could ever have on our own. So he finishes out and he gives us two examples on how to persevere in the face of suffering. He says, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who persevered. You also heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. Like, I love that word. That kind of caught my attention. Finally. He's like, we use that as an exclamation mark. Like, finally this happened, God. Well, yeah, it's going to finally happen one day. And it says because the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. So we're going to close with this thought. I want to encourage you because when we're going through trials, when things are terrible, we want everything to be done away with right now. Right? Like those of us who are going through a difficult time, we want everything to change instantly. We all do. We don't like suffering, right? But we have to have an eternal perspective, and we need to establish in our hearts that the coming of the Lord is near. And we should have this anticipation, just like a farmer does. Hey, I've planted some things. It's going to work out. He says, look at the prophets, right? You can pick any one of the prophets of old. I'll just pick one randomly, like Jeremiah, right? He was beaten, he was tortured, he was abused, he was thrown in stocks, he was thrown in prisons, right? And the Lord said, hey, I want you to go prophesy to my people for 40 years of ministry, okay? And guess what? Nobody's gonna listen to you. 40 years. I mean, can you imagine? I get nervous for 4 minutes if you're not listening to me, right? This guy had to do his ministry for 40 years. And he's like, they patiently endured. They patiently waited because they knew God had a plan and a perspective. And he says, look at the Job. If you read the book of Job, it's actually considered the first book ever written in the Bible, before even Genesis. Read the book of Job and you'll see some of the things that Job has gone through. And he says, hey, I'm going to wait patiently on the Lord because the Lord's got this. God was at work despite all those horrible circumstances that I was going through. Now, I don't know what struggles you're going through, everybody, right now, but God and James is encouraging us, hold on. Everything's going to work out. If you think those unjust people are having their heyday, there's going to come a time where God shows up and the economics of this world are going to be turned upside down. And they're going to get their moment. And the judgment is coming, and weeping and wailing and misery is on their way. But for us who are patient, who are being planted, who have this eternal perspective, these things don't bother us, everybody. Because we understand life is short. We're not going to be here forever. We understand God has a plan and a purpose for our life, and we're going to activate the plan and purpose and get on the fast track of what God has best for you and I. We realize our possessions are not our own. We're going to be not hoarding. We're going to share. We're going to be generous. We're going to treat our possessions with wisdom. And then finally, we know that everything that we're going through, it's temporary. It's temporary. In light of that long string of eternity, it's all temporary, everybody. So I'm going to invite the worship team forward because we're going to close with this song. And this speaks about the goodness of God. And I want you guys to just kind of, I don't know if we've done this song before here at Journey or not, but if we haven't, just listen to the words. They're really powerful in this idea of just trusting God and keeping your eternal mindset and eternal focus dialed in and sharp, especially in the world that we live in today. We need it, everybody. We need it because we can easily get wrapped up in the things of this world.